Welcome to DCB's College Football Preview. Welcome back to the preview. Today we are talking about the Big 12, the most balanced league in America. No true national title contenders in this league, but no true bottom feeders either. Last year, the 13th rated team in terms of the preseason odds won the whole thing. That was Arizona State. Kind of came out of nowhere, but it shows that any team in this league in any given year has the ability to finish last or first, and that's what makes this league so exciting. So let's dig into it and break down the teams one by one. Now, depending on when you look, any one of 4 or 5 different teams could be favored to win this league. The odds have been shifting all over the place throughout the summer, but we're going to go ahead and start with Texas Tech. It was interesting to listen to some of the coaches at Big 12 Media Day talk about this team, and everyone kind of acknowledged that this roster is possibly a cut above the rest. It still needs to be proven on the field, as Texas Tech to this point has been nothing but a talent acquisition machine. They went 8-5 a year ago, which is fine, but not the level that they're expecting to reach. They've noticed an opening here in the Big 12 with not really any premier programs that are contending for national titles at the moment, and they have the money to possibly get into the conversation. They have not only the number 1 returning production unit on defense this season, but they also attacked the transfer portal hard, bringing in a whole new defensive line essentially with one of the best edge rushers in America in David Bailey Jr. from NC State, and a pair of defensive tackles, specifically Lee Hunter from UCF, another conference team that they poached him from. I really like how this team is setting up for the future. I don't know if this is the year, though. I've seen a lot of people talking about Texas Tech as obviously a contender to win this league. I don't disagree with that, but the schedule is relatively difficult, and I think they still might be 1 year away, despite a lot of pieces that I do have to say are very intriguing. Baron Morton, the quarterback, comes back to start for another season, and he's got a great receiving core around him. Caleb Douglas and Coy Eakin both return on the outside, and then they bring in a bunch of other skill guys out of the portal with running back Quentin Joyner from USC, a receiver from Miami of Ohio by the name of Reggie Virgil, and a tight end from Louisiana who was highly productive, Terrence Carter. So a lot of talent offensively for this team, and as I said, the defense should be loaded, especially in the front 7. So Texas Tech will be favored in at least 9 of their games, possibly 10 of them, as we go through the schedule. But again, some of these are a little bit more of a coin flip than maybe they appear on the surface. They got to go to Utah in their first Big 12 road game, and they follow that up with another road game at Houston. I'm not sure how they ended up with back-to-back road trips to start Big 12 play, but I think that is enough to possibly trip them up on their way through the season. So going to be tough to build momentum. They also have an interesting non-conference game against Oregon State. They should be a pretty solid favorite in that game, but should be, I think, a competitive matchup there. And then throughout conference play, just difficult road games at Arizona State and at Kansas State later on. So Texas Tech, very talented team. I'm very high on the program overall and in the long term. But this year, I'm tempering the expectations slightly. The win total sits at 8.5. I do lean towards the over. The juice definitely leans that way. Also from the books, I have them going 9-3. Next up is Utah, a team that really had a pretty disappointing year a season ago, going just 5-7. Kyle Whittingham has definitely set much higher expectations for this program over the course of his tenure. Some would say that was Utah struggling in the first year back in the Big 12, but I think they're in a good position to bounce back this season. If you look at the way that the odds have shifted this summer, the professional bettors have absolutely hammered all of the value out of this Utah team. I believe they opened around 15-1 to win the conference, and now they're sitting at around 6-1. So that's about as drastic as a shift that as I've seen in one offseason, but it shows that a lot of smart people are really in on this team, and the win total does indicate that they should have some natural progression from the 5-7 year. They are sitting at 7-5 on that number, juiced heavily to the over. And really, if you look at last year's team, I don't think they were as bad as their record indicates. there were still some pretty strong pieces to the team. They just lacked a quarterback. And what did they do? They went into the transfer portal, as many teams do these days, and they got themselves a kid from New Mexico by the name of Devon Dampier. He led what was an unexpectedly exciting offense down there last season, mostly because of his ability to be exciting in the run game. Over 1,100 yards on the ground, along with 19 touchdowns, but wasn't quite as efficient through the air, matching his touchdown total with interceptions, 12 apiece. I don't think that's going to cut it in the Big 12, so he's going to have to get a lot more efficient, but another year of development and better coaching staff, perhaps. His offensive coordinator does come over with him, Jason Beck, so some cohesion to that unit. They also bring back an extremely experienced offensive line, led by possibly the best offensive tackle in America in Spencer Fano. They have a great tackle on the other side as well with Caleb Lomu. I don't normally shout out individual offensive linemen, but this unit might be the best in America. So always like to back teams that have an experienced offensive line, and Kyle Whittingham knows how to coach the trenches on both sides of the ball. I'm always going to trust him on defense, and they were fine on that side of the ball last year, so very much expecting a good year from Utah. As I said, the value mostly gone in them to win the league, but I still think even at plus 550 or plus 600 could be worth a shot. Just have to know that the difference in price is dramatic. The schedule is interesting. They face a lot of difficult opponents, but most of them are at home. They face Texas Tech in week 4, as we just talked about. Arizona State in week 7 comes in there as well. Kansas State, they also get at home towards the back half of the season. Outside of that, most of their road games are easier matchups. So that's typically what you want in a conference like this, where most teams are relatively similar, even though there are starting to become tiers within the Big 12, I would say. I think Utah has a very favorable schedule and a lot of things to be excited about for this team. So if Dampier can just cut down on the turnovers a little bit, he's going to have a much better supporting staff around him, and that offensive line is going to carry this team a long ways. So Utah, I actually have projected to win 10 or 11 games this year. I believe that strongly in Kyle Whittingham, and I think last year was a complete fluke. Next up is Kansas State, maybe the most steady program in the Big 12. You pretty much know what you're going to get out of Chris Kleiman's team. The win total sits at 8.5, and that's pretty much where you would expect it to be every year for this team. 8-4, 9-3, that's the Kansas State way. I think Kleiman has done a great job in building this program up and setting the culture the way that he wants. I don't know how much more the ceiling can rise, though. So I know he's been a candidate for a lot of other jobs. I wonder how many more years he has in Manhattan, Kansas. Their ability to acquire talent has been fine. They bring in the number 35 class this season out of high school. That's actually the second highest ranked in the Big 12, which gives you an idea of the relative talent in this league versus the SEC and the Big 10. But they do bring back an experienced now quarterback in Avery Johnson, only a one-year starter, but in college football these days, a full season of being a starter and playing a little bit the season prior is a ton of experience relative to most teams. They bring back Dylan Edwards at the running back spot. They don't really use the portal a ton, although they did bring in a couple of defensive players. The one guy I'm going to shout out here that you probably won't hear on many podcasts, they bring in a 5-star tight end by the name of Lincoln Cure. He's a local kid from Kansas. I think that's the perfect type of prospect that ends up flourishing in a system like Chris Kleiman's and at a program like Kansas State. So watch out for Lincoln Cure. If you ever see his props listed, especially early on in the season, those lines will probably be too low. So expecting him to be a big part of this offense, and Kansas State to be about as steady as ever. As I said at the top, win total sitting at 8.5. My projections have them sitting at either 9-3 or 8-4. So definitely not touching that either way with my money. The schedule, they play a very interesting game early on. Week 0, the very first game of the college football season. They're traveling to Ireland to play a team that is just one state over from them. That's Iowa State. Very unorthodox, this era of college football, sometimes with our scheduling. But that'll be a banger of a game to kick off. Kansas State favored by just 3 points, and two teams coming off of very similar seasons a year ago. So that should be a great matchup to kick us off in week 0. Next, let's talk about Arizona State, the team that won the league last year. Kenny Dillingham, one of the youngest head coaches in college football, really burst onto the scene with that team, and he brings back the number 2 returning production squad in the whole country. Returning production is a term that doesn't necessarily break through to the general public most of the time, but you do get a couple of teams each year that are high enough in these rankings to become part of the general conversation. And Arizona State is one of those teams this year. If you remember back to a season ago, Virginia Tech came in with a similar level of returning production, and a lot of people picked them to win the ACC, to be a dark horse to make the playoff. And Arizona State not only has the returning production, but they also, as I said, had some success a year ago. So you put those two together, and they seem like a slam dunk to repeat as conference champions. But if you look on most major books, they're going to be 4th or 5th to win the league, and that's because I think they were just a little ahead of schedule last year. Cam Skattebo may be the only major loss that they suffered, but it is a big one. He was really the heart and soul of that offense a year ago, and I think that Sam Leavitt, as good as he was, really operated from a position of managing the game, where Skattebo could be the star. Now Leavitt will be the main focus. And although he does have some good weapons around him, I'm not sure the run game is going to be able to take as much pressure off of him. I think the offensive line will be under more pressure to protect him as well. And the defense, while they do return most of the players, I'm not convinced they really have top-level talent across the board there. They have a couple of interesting non-conference games early on with Mississippi State on the road in week 2. They should be a solid favorite in that game, but if you compare the two rosters just in terms of pure star rating, Mississippi State does have more talent overall. I'm not saying they're going to win that outright, but I think it'll be a much more competitive matchup than it was when they played in Tempe a year ago. They also play Texas State in week 3, which on paper is a big mismatch, but if you look back to the game last year, Texas State was actually a slight favorite at home in that one, and it was one of the most low-key, high-level games of the season. It was very competitive, and Texas State has shown an ability to spend unlike most G5 programs in the NIL era. The conference schedule also, I think, is tougher than most realize. Although Arizona State will probably be small favorites in a lot of these games early on, if the losses start to add up, I think things can start to go sideways for this team. They start with a road trip to Baylor. They play TCU at home, and then another road trip at Utah. Those are their first 3 Big 12 games. Then they come home to face Texas Tech, so it doesn't get any easier. Their last 3 games of the season are the bottom 3 teams in terms of the odds in the league, so they have an opportunity to finish strong if they can just make it to that point. However, I just think they're going to struggle to reach that point in a good enough position to contend for the league with as deep as the top of it is. I think Arizona State's win total being juiced slightly to the under at 8.5 is another indicator that they may struggle just a little more. And with the pressure on them, I just am not sure how they're going to respond as a program with a very young staff. So Arizona State, I still think, will be in the top tier of the league for years to come if Dillingham keeps his staff together and continues to build the culture there. I just don't think this year is going to be quite as nice as last year. I'm expecting a step back, and I will be definitely fading them quite a few times on a game-to-game basis once we get into the meat of the Big 12 schedule. Let's go over to Baylor, a team that really got back to its roots, I thought, last year in being an explosive, pass-heavy offense. Bringing in offensive coordinator Jake Spavital really gave them a boost on that side of the ball, and they ended up finishing 8-4 in the regular season after Dave Aranda was really on the hot seat coming in. You could argue that he still is if they have another bad season in 2025, but I think they're on their way to being a contender this season. I really like the returning production on offense across the board with Sawyer Robertson at quarterback, Bryson Washington at running back, and Josh Cameron leading a nice group of receivers. A lot of big physical and speedy guys in that room. Overall, number 11 in returning production, not high enough to be on most people's radars, but a very solid core of returning players. They also add some transfers that will help. Kobe Prentice comes over as a receiver from Alabama, and they bring in some very productive linebackers that will help stabilize what was a pretty average defense in terms of tackling last year. They opened the season with a huge home game against Auburn, a team that we talked about in the SEC preview. I think Auburn is a team that in time will be very good and possibly even playoff level good. But early on, I'll be much more inclined to trust the experience of Baylor than the transfers of Auburn. So Baylor in a great position there. If you look at the shift of the odds on that game, they opened at a 2.5 point underdog. The books let that line sit out there for a long time, which already was somewhat suspicious to me, because why would you let a 2.5 sit out there all summer for an SEC team? But Baylor, as far as I've noticed recently, has actually flipped to a slight favorite in that game. So some other smarter minds on the same path as I am with that one. I think they're going to start the season well, but once you really look at this schedule as a whole, it is difficult. One of two teams in the country to play 11 Power 4 opponents. The other one is TCU, a team we'll talk about next. But Baylor, 5 of their first 7 games, they have a potential to be an underdog in. And that's not a fault of theirs. I think this is a good team, but these are just really difficult opponents. As I said, it's essentially a coin flip with Auburn in week 1. But they'll be an underdog on the road at SMU in week 2, another really difficult game against a playoff team from a year ago. They do get one FCS opponent in Samford, but then they dive straight into Big 12 play with Arizona State. There's a back-to-back road stretch with TCU and Cincinnati in the middle of it, and they play some other teams that I'm very high on. We will discuss those as we continue to work through the conference. But Baylor, the schedule really is the biggest impediment to having a great season. I still think the capability is there for them to win 9 or 10 games, and that's where I have them projected. But the win total sits at just 7.5 due to that schedule difficulty. We will see in September how good this team really is, and if they come out of it unscathed, then they have a chance to really run the table. But I would expect at least one loss as they head into October. Next, as I said, is TCU, the other team in the country that plays 11 Power 4 opponents. They also play SMU in the non-conference, as well as the opener at North Carolina. We'll see Bill Belichick on display in college. TCU finished 9-4 a year ago. I would say a quiet 9-4. The season prior was so bad that everyone kind of disregarded this program, even just 2 seasons after making the national title game. But Sonny Dykes is still there, and he still has a very good staff. Something that was interesting to me about them this summer is they didn't really hit the portal nearly as hard as they have the past couple of seasons. That's because Sonny Dykes already likes the core group of guys that he has. He's got a really good, experienced quarterback in Josh Hoover. Definitely needs to cut down on the turnovers a little bit this year, but when he gets going, he can light you up for 400 or 500 pass yards in a game. We've seen that already in his career. He's got a nice group of receivers with Eric McAllister returning and Joseph Manjack coming over from Houston after being a highlight reel over there. Still some very experienced pieces on the defense as well, and overall, I would say this has been the most consistent program in terms of recruiting players out of high school in the Big 12 over a 5-year sample. As I said, once again with this team, it's going to be a schedule issue. If they can get through a couple of these difficult games in September, they can really get in a rhythm and build towards the end of the year, because I would say it's very front-loaded, similar to Baylor. The North Carolina game, they're only a 3-point favorite at the moment. I have them a little bit higher, but that's where the books have it at the moment. SMU, they do get them at home, but that'll be another non-conference test. Road games at Arizona State, Kansas State, and BYU headline the conference schedule, and then they get Baylor at home in week 8. But TCU going to play most of the big dogs and not too many breaks from week to week. So I'm expecting an explosive offense. They're going to have to be, and they're going to have to be a little more balanced. Their starting running back transferred, but he went to Jacksonville State, which is definitely a down a level from the Big 12. So I think TCU will be able to run the ball a little bit better here, and hopefully that will lead to better results as we've seen with them. TCU has always had a relatively high ceiling as a program, even before they joined the Big 12, and I think that remains. But the win total does sit at just 6.5. The juice is pretty heavy to the over, and I have them projected at 8-4, maybe 9-3 if one of the coin flip games goes their way. Let's go now to Iowa State, a team that finished 11-3 in 2024, a school record for wins. And Iowa State, another one of these teams that is just not used to really being a football school. So that was unexpected a year ago. However, they lost 2 NFL wide receivers, probably the first time in school history that they've had that kind of talent out wide. And although I do like quarterback Rocco Becht, who does return, I'm afraid that without his 2 main weapons, it's going to be a lot harder for this team to move the ball down the field. I like the defense. They return more production on that side of the ball than the offense. Not very highly rated on either side of the ball in terms of those rankings. And the talent overall, if you really dig into the roster, is not great. But that's just kind of what you have to expect at Iowa State. You have to rely on player development if you want to have a season like they did a year ago. I just think it's going to be really difficult to replicate, unfortunately, for Matt Campbell. As we talked about with Kansas State, they open against them in Dublin, Ireland in week 0. I'm not really sure what type of effect that's going to have on this team. I'm expecting Kansas State to win that, and I'm not sure how Iowa State's going to respond. They then have to face Iowa in the Cyhawk game. That's week 2, so 2 of their first 3 games are going to be really difficult, both within 3 points on the spread at this current moment in time. And with the win total juiced to the under at 7.5, I just think replicating an 11-win season is going to be a lot to ask from this staff. And I think Rocco Becht is unfortunately going to take a step back. I don't think that says anything about him as a player, just the relative lack of talent around him. They also lost an offensive lineman to the NFL draft, 4 NFL picks in total, which is a lot for this program. So I think Iowa State struggles in comparison to last year. They should still make a bowl game, but that's where I've got them projected actually at 6-6. I could see 7. I could be talked into 8. But if you're asking for a lean on the win total, I lean pretty strong to the under at 7.5. Next, we'll go over to a rival of Iowa State's, and that's Kansas, a program that I've come to have some serious respect for these past couple of years. Lance Leipold has come in and brought a winning culture to Kansas football for really the first time ever. They only went 5-7 a year ago, but a lot of that was due to a bunch of injuries stacking up early on in the year, and they really finished the season with some momentum, pulling off some big upsets, including against BYU. Quarterback Jalen Daniels returns for what feels like his 7th year in college, and he's got 2 running backs with him in his backfield that I feel great about. Daniel Highshaw Jr. takes over probably as more of a lead runner now, with Devin Neal moving on to the NFL draft, but they also bring in LaShawn Williams from Iowa to be a secondary option. I really like this backfield here in the Big 12, and I think the momentum that Kansas built in the second half of 2024 will lead into this season being better than a year ago. They play Fresno State in week 0 at home. I just highlight that because Fresno is always a sneaky G5 opponent. I do think Kansas should be able to handle business there, but then they also go to Missouri in a big non-conference rivalry game in week 2. They'll be about a 7-point underdog in that one. A road trip to Texas Tech in week 7 is probably their toughest Big 12 game, but then they get Kansas State and Utah both at home. So overall, I think Kansas is a major dark horse in this league. I don't love backing teams that don't have a lot of great football history, but I really think things are just different now that Lance Leipold is there. They have upped their recruiting rankings steadily ever since he arrived there. They've done well in the transfer portal, bringing in a top 40 class this year, highlighted by Williams from Iowa, as I said, but they also bring in a receiver from Alabama in Emmanuel Henderson Jr. I like this team, and I think 7.5 is too low on that win total. And as we mentioned at the top of this pod, the Big 12 is wide open every year. So when you're looking at teams to win the league as outright future bets, I feel like you're better off taking some long shots than betting with the favorites. So I will be taking a small wager on Kansas to win this league. It's not going to be a lot of money, but in this league, any team has as good a shot as anyone else. And I think Kansas, with the experience in the backfield and how much I like this coaching staff, I think they're a great value pick. So I think they're around 15 or 18 to 1, somewhere in that range, depending on where you look. Always make sure to shop around with as many books as you have available to you. Next is BYU, a team that compared to how they finished last year is really far down this ranking. Finished 11-2 and were really one of the stories of college football. I always try and take my biases out of these podcasts or anytime I'm doing analysis of college football in particular, but BYU was maybe the most frustrating team to bet against that I have ever dealt with in any sport. They just found ways to win last year, and I think they much exceeded their talent, but that's a credit to Kalani Sitake and his staff. He was definitely trending toward the hot seat last year, but thoroughly saved his job, and I don't think he's going anywhere. BYU was elite in the turnover margin, and they just seemed to score miraculous defensive and special teams touchdowns whenever they needed to in key games. Part of the magic was quarterback Jake Retzlaff, who is probably the story of the offseason for BYU. He transferred out and is now at Tulane. And while he was the big name on the offense, I think they're going to do fine in replacing his production. We don't know yet who the starting quarterback will be. It'll either be McKay Hillstad, which sounds like the most Utah quarterback name of all time, or a freshman in Bear Bachmeier, who they're really high on. Either way, the strength of this team is going to be pounding the football on the ground with LJ Martin. They return their top receiver in Chase Roberts, who is one of the best in the Big 12. And overall, the returning production on offense is pretty solid at number 22 in the country. They play at East Carolina in the non-conference, which I think is an interesting kind of sleeper game in week 4. Nobody's really going to be talking about that one. But East Carolina is an American Conference team that presents a real home field advantage, and I think that game could get real interesting early on. That's also the first of back-to-back road games, and BYU has 2 of those stretches. You don't see that very often in college football. Usually you get your road games more spaced out. You don't have to take back-to-back trips, but 2 of those on the BYU schedule. The odds on this team have also shifted a lot this summer. As I said, for Utah, shifting up. It's kind of going the opposite way for BYU. Ironic, maybe, given that they're such bitter rivals, those 2 schools. But BYU, after going 11-2, people expecting a lot of regression out of this team. Let's just say that win total is moved all the way down to 6.5, and the juice is pretty even in either direction. I think it is a little bit of an overreaction. Like I said, I don't personally rate Retzlaff as high as a lot of people do. I think he was a system quarterback, and I think the BYU offense is going to operate just fine without him. So as frustrated as I was fading this team a year ago, I'm actually not going to be again with the win total. I have them projected at 7.5. So 6.5 I think is too low. I'm not going to take the over either. I think the number is probably about right in that I could see results on either side of it. BYU though, maybe a little bit too much of an overreaction just because of that transfer. We go now to Cincinnati, another one of the newcomers in the Big 12 from 2 seasons ago. Went just 5-7 a year ago. Scott Satterfield as the head coach, I think, is one of the weaker in the Big 12. I just don't trust this staff too much when it comes to big games. Luckily for them, though, there's not a lot of big games on this schedule. They do open with Nebraska in week 1. That game is a neutral site game in Kansas City. I think Nebraska should be improved, and it looks like they'll be about a 7-point favorite over the Bearcats in that one. But outside of that, Cincinnati probably has the easiest schedule in the Big 12. They don't play Kansas State. They don't play Texas Tech. They do play at Utah, but aside from that, this is an incredibly workable schedule. So in another scenario, I would have Cincinnati rated much lower, but I actually have them projected to go about 6-6. The offense should be relatively good. Brendan Sorsby actually had somewhat of a breakout season, transferring over from the Big Ten. He's got his running back in Evan Pryor as well. They also bring a transfer over in the backfield from Wisconsin. That's Tawi Walker. So the offense, I don't have as many concerns about. The defense, outside of Dante Corleone, who has been a stud in the middle of that defensive line for several years now, there's just not too many pieces that I'm really excited about. And like I said, the ultimate issue with this team that I have is the staff. I don't think Scott Satterfield was the right hire after Luke Fickell. And so despite being the number 11 team overall in returning production, I don't trust this team to have enough to get into the upper echelons of the Big 12, even with an easy schedule. Next is probably the team I'm most excited about in the Big 12, and that is Houston. Just 4-8 a season ago really was kind of a warm-up season in my eyes for head coach Willie Fritz after Dana Holgorsen really just left the cupboard completely bare. But you have to think back to when Houston was in the American Conference. They were consistently one of the top 2 or 3 teams in that league year in and year out. And so while last year was a bit of a speed bump, I think Houston's in a great position to take a big step up in year 2 under Fritz. He's got a pretty young staff around him, including defensive coordinator Austin Armstrong, who they hired away from Florida. He was the co-defensive coordinator down there in the swamp and I guess wanted to have full-time play calling duties. So he gets that opportunity here at Houston, and they were actually very solid on the defensive side of the ball a year ago. They just didn't have quite enough offense to compete in the Big 12. Even so, that defense was good enough to pull off a couple of big wins down the stretch, including against Kansas State. Now they bring in a top 30 class in the portal and are a top 20 team overall in returning production. Specifically in terms of players, quarterback Connor Wegman comes over from Texas A&M, and while he has been much maligned publicly because of some of his off-the-field conduct, people like to make fun of his fake Southern accent that he used in that locker room, I still think he's a very solid player. He was a very highly touted recruit out of high school, and I think given a second chance here at Houston, I think he's going to thrive, and this offense should be much improved from a year ago. A pair of running backs lead the way in Rice transfer Dean Connors, who is very productive, and returning running back Rashawn Sanford II. I like this team so much that I'm going to sprinkle them to win the league at 35-1. That is a crazy price, but as we've said throughout the podcast, the Big 12 is an open league, and Houston I'm expecting to be so improved that I don't think just taking over 5.5 wins is enough. I will be taking probably over 6.5, over 7.5, and as I said, even sprinkling them to get involved in the conference title picture. I do have them projected 3rd overall, but to me, that is good enough value when you look at the odds. Compared to where I have them finishing, I'll take that shot every time. So Houston, defense I trust. They bring in a couple of transfers over on that side of the ball as well. But then the offense, I'm just expecting such a big jump. And Willie Fritz, I think, is one of the most underrated head coaches in America. So very much in on everything Houston. This could be a cold take at the end of the year, but as I'm evaluating this roster, I like it a lot. So give me the value shot with the Cougars. Let's move on over to Colorado. Head coach Deion Sanders, very controversial figure, always makes his way into news headlines one way or another. A lot of people love him, a lot of people dislike him, But one thing you can't deny is he's done a great job in 2 years turning Colorado into a real program, from winning one game the year before he arrived to finishing 9-4 in 2024. The problem, though, is they lost their two do-it-all superstars in obviously Travis Hunter, the Heisman winner a year ago, played on both sides of the ball and did both tremendously well, and quarterback Shedeur Sanders, who, although he dropped to the third round of the draft, was extremely productive without really much of a run game or any offensive line help. Not only Travis Hunter leaves from the offense, but LaJohntay Wester and Jimmy Horn, two other receivers picked in the draft as well. I just don't know if Colorado's going to be able to replace that level of production. They've been this team that just reloads and just ships 50 guys out and brings 50 new guys in every offseason, but it worked because they had a couple of superstars that everyone had to game plan around. That's no longer the case, and at the quarterback position, we have a battle heading into the fall. True freshman Julian Lewis was a highly touted prospect, but from everything that I've heard, I don't think he's quite ready to step in full time, so they will probably go with Liberty transfer Caden Salter. 2 years ago, Salter was extremely productive, and he led Liberty to a great year. But in 2024, he took a major step back, really struggled with turnovers, and I don't trust the pieces around him enough to, A, protect him. We saw the offensive line just struggle mightily year after year. Sanders was the most sacked quarterback in the Big 12 by far last season, and I don't think the skill positions are nearly as good either. They bring in a running back transfer from Coastal Carolina and Simeon Price, but outside of that, there's not a lot of pieces to highlight, and that's been the strength of this team. As I said, 3 wide receivers drafted into the NFL. The schedule is pretty difficult as well. They open with Georgia Tech in the non-conference, a team that brings back a ton of experience on offense themselves and should be able to outscore Colorado in my estimation. The win total now sits at 5.5 on most books for Colorado. It has been moving down steadily throughout the summer, and after going 9-4 a year ago, I think that tells you everything you need to know right there. Major regression coming for this team. I have them projected to win either 3 or 4 games. Now we head over to West Virginia, a team that has actually generated quite a bit of buzz this summer, mostly because they bring back head coach Rich Rodriguez. Had a lot of success the first go-around at WVU, not so much success at some other stops afterward. Really blew up the program at Michigan, struggled at Arizona, did get back on his feet the past couple of years at Jacksonville State, but usually when a head coach comes back around to a program the second time, it doesn't go quite as well as the first time. I'm expecting a pretty bumpy road here for West Virginia. Completely new roster, just a ton of overhaul here with 52 transfers coming in, 51 leaving, which leaves them with an overall returning production ranking of 97th. They've been remarkably consistent recruiting out of high school, ranking 46th, 46th, and 48th in their last 3 classes. But they've got some big question marks all across the roster. Obviously, when you have this many guys going in and out, you don't really know what things are going to look like. But the key position of quarterback, I don't think they really have any great options there. Nico Marchiol is back, and he has started a couple of games for them in recent years, but they haven't really gone very well when he's been on the field. They bring in a couple of transfer quarterbacks, one from Texas A&M and Jalen Henderson, and Max Brown also from Charlotte. All 3 of these guys are basically pure running quarterbacks in my eyes. I don't know that they're really going to have a guy that can push the ball down the field. They bring in a couple more transfers from Jacksonville State, which will be impact players instantly for them on both sides of the ball. But overall, I just see Rich Rod kind of coming in and blowing everything up in year 1, and maybe this will be a long-term project that works out. But West Virginia, as it stands, I think will be an underdog in every single conference game. They also have a couple of non-conference games that could trip them up. They play Pittsburgh in a huge rivalry game. They do get that at home, but they'll be probably about a 4 or 5 point underdog in that game. And they also have a road trip to Ohio in week 2. And as it stands, that's basically a coin flip at the moment. They'll probably be a short favorite in that game just because they're the bigger program, but I could absolutely see them losing that game outright. Ohio has a nice returning quarterback that West Virginia does not have, so I actually trust their offense more overall. And I just think it's going to be a really rough season overall for West Virginia in the Big 12. So give me the under on the win total at 5.5. Almost certainly will be locking that one in if I can find a reasonable price. I see this team only winning 2 or 3 games in year 1 under Rich Rod. We're getting down to the bottom feeders here, and if you're still listening to this podcast, I just want to say I much appreciate you. I put a lot of time and work into creating these podcasts and try to give out as much information as possible. Really, all I want to do here is help people out. So really appreciate those of you who are still listening at this point. We've got 3 teams remaining to go through with the Big 12. We're going to go to Oklahoma State next, a team that really you used to be able to rely on, similar to Kansas State, beyond Oklahoma and Texas when they were in the Big 12. Those two were really the most consistent programs. Beyond that, Mike Gundy, only 1 losing season since he was hired, but that changed. Last year, going just 3-9, did not win a single Big 12 game. It really was shocking because coming into the year, their expectations were very high. They brought back one of the best running backs in America in Ollie Gordon and an extremely experienced offensive line, one of the most experienced in college football history, and they just couldn't run the ball for some reason. That just completely broke down their identity as a team last year, and obviously you see the results with the 3-9 overall record. Once again, another team here that had a lot of turnover, 41 transfers in total coming in, 28 go out. They lose 4 guys to the NFL, Ollie Gordon being one of those as mentioned. The returning production is very low as a result, number 102 overall, but that could be a good thing for a team with such a bad record last year. Once again, similar to West Virginia, I don't know what we're going to get at the quarterback position. There are a couple of interesting options. Zane Flores is the only guy who returns on the roster with any experience at all, but they also bring in House Haney. I'm not sure I'm saying that name 100% correctly, but he's a redshirt freshman transfer from TCU. He is an electric runner, from what I've been told, so possibly could make it so Oklahoma State is at least fun to watch this year. I just don't know how much we can really expect beyond that. They got to go to Oregon in the non-conference. That's pretty much a guaranteed loss. It looks like Oregon should be about a 31-point favorite in that game, which is mind-blowing. Big 12 schedule is relatively manageable. A back-to-back road stretch against Texas Tech and Kansas will be hard. But Oklahoma State, really, this is do-or-die time for Mike Gundy. It was so consistent for so long, and you could always rely on Oklahoma State bouncing back. If they only won 6 or 7 games one year, you knew they were coming back to win 9 or 10 the next year. I just don't have that same feeling with this team. I think if I were to guess whether they were to have a really good contending style season or another one that was close to 3-9, I would lean more towards the 3-9. So 5.5 is the win total, juiced pretty heavily to the under. I have them at either 4 or 5 wins. I think the number is pretty spot on. 2 teams left. We'll go over to Arizona, and we'll finish with UCF. Arizona last year, another one of these teams that came in with a ton of expectations. Quarterback Noah Fafita had really lit the world on fire the year before, and he had a great receiver in Tet McMillan, who ended up being one of the first off the board in the NFL draft. First-round pick is gone from that offense now, but they're still going to be a very fun offensive team. Fafita is a 3rd-year starter, which is very, very rare in college football these days. I think Arizona is the chaos team in the Big 12. I have zero trust in this defense. I don't think there's many pieces to like across the board on that side of the ball. They bring back a lot more production on offense than they do on defense, and I think they've focused much more on recruiting that side of the ball in recent years. 5.5 is the win total. The juice is slightly to the over. I just think the books don't know what to do with this team, and I don't either. They bring in Ishmael Mahdi, a very productive running back from Texas State. I think he'll be a really nice complement to Fafita in the backfield. Outside of that, the pieces just don't really add up for a contending season. That's why you see Arizona down here in the bottom feeders. But as I said, chaos team. I think there's going to be a lot of high scoring games with this team. I think they'll probably pull off at least one win that you just say, how did they do that? Is maybe a 2 or 3 touchdown underdog. And they'll probably lose a couple of games that should have been layups. But Brent Brennan, one of the most inexperienced head coaches in the Power Four, just don't know if I could rely on him. But chaos team here with Arizona, I'm going to keep saying it. I'm going to beat that label into this team. So Arizona, the chaos team of the Big 12, I could see them going anywhere in between 2-10 or 8-4. So I'll go with 6-6 as the most likely outcome. Final team on the list is UCF, a team that just went 4-8 in 2024. I was really excited about them coming into last season, and it just didn't work out. Gus Malzahn was the head coach, had some exciting pieces on offense, I thought, had some big transfers, a quarterback from Arkansas and KJ Jefferson, and it just turned into a dumpster fire really quickly. I think UCF has done a good job of upgrading their facilities and building up their program to put themselves in a position to compete in the Big 12, but that's the standing of the program. They've still got some work to do on the field, clearly, and they brought in a whole new staff this offseason. Unfortunately for them, I think this may be the worst Power 5 staff I've ever seen put together. Scott Frost returns as the head coach, another situation similar to West Virginia with Rich Rodriguez. Frost had a ton of success first go around with UCF, technically won a national championship if you want to legitimize that claim, but he brings his offensive coordinator over from Nebraska, where things did not go well for Frost when he was there. And then the defensive coordinator is actually Alex Grinch. A lot of you probably know that name, and not many coordinators become household names, but Grinch was the coordinator of USC's defense under Lincoln Riley until last year, and they put up historically terrible numbers and really held back some elite offenses from being able to achieve some great things. So I think this staff is really going to hold back UCF a lot. They've done a pretty good job of acquiring talent. The high school recruiting did take a nosedive this season with the staff change, but before that, they were trending towards being a top 40 recruiting program. We don't really know much about what this roster is going to look like. Similar to a lot of these teams here at the bottom of the league, they lose running back RJ Harvey to the second round of the draft. I think that's going to be a huge loss. He was their everything back on the offense a year ago, and I don't know that they're going to be able to replace that production. They do bring in a transfer running back from Western Michigan, Jaden Nixon. He was very productive at his previous stop. I just don't think he's the same level of player as Harvey was. The quarterback position is probably going to be filled by Taven Jackson. He's played at both Tennessee and Indiana the past 2 years, but hasn't seen the field a ton. UCF has an interesting non-conference game against North Carolina in week 4. If they win that, I think there's a path to a bowl game potentially there. That's because they also have home games against Oklahoma State and West Virginia in conference play. They get to play Jacksonville State and North Carolina A&T in the non-conference. So if they do scrape their way to 6 wins, it will be because they've got a lot of relatively easy opportunities for home wins, and it is hard to play in the bounce house. I think they have an underrated home field advantage, but I think UCF is a program that is a long-term buy this year. I just can't get involved. So many talented players off of a team that struggled last year off of the roster, and we just don't know what we're going to get. So nothing personal towards UCF, but in any situation like that, I'm going to lean towards fading that team. Maybe Frost finds himself some better coordinators in year 2 and starts to put it back together in his second go around at UCF. I just don't see it this year. The win total sits at 5.5. I'm leaning pretty strong towards the under. So As much as I did mention a couple of sleeper teams towards the bottom here, Houston specifically, I'm a big fan of. Arizona, I think, has the potential to mess a bunch of teams' seasons up and be kind of a chaos agent in the league. But a lot of these other bottom feeders, I think, are actually going to stay there this year. Of course, it's the Big 12, so it's possible that all of these predictions are sideways and upside down. But I do feel like I've got a fairly good feel for this league after watching it so much over the past couple of years. It's just so entertaining. I love the Big 12. I do wish that the playoff formatting was a little bit different so that this league would still have a chance to win a national championship. Under the current format and the way that they have kind of fallen behind the two major leagues in terms of talent acquisition overall, I think it's going to be tough. I can't see myself placing any futures on Big 12 teams to win the national championship anytime soon. The closest I could see myself getting is Texas Tech, maybe next year if they continue to spend the same type of money that they did this summer. But it takes a while to build a program to truly elite status, and none of the teams in the Big 12 are at that level right now. So it's beautiful for competitive balance, and I love watching this league every given Saturday because you never know what's going to happen at this current moment. But there's your Big 12 preview. I'm going to give you guys a little summary, just as I did for the first two episodes, of teams I'm generally higher or lower on as we go into the season. Higher on, I like Utah to have a bounce-back season. Baylor, I think, should be electric on offense, and if they can get through their early gauntlet of a schedule, I like them a lot. I like Kansas with the returning production in the backfield. Jalen Daniels, I'm praying that he stays healthy this year because I like this Kansas offense a lot. Houston, I'm so high on this team. I could not be more in on Houston. And as far as teams that I don't like as much as the market, Arizona State, I just think is a little bit overhyped coming into this year. I think they take a small step back. They should still be a capable team, but not in the college football playoff contending range. Iowa State, I think, takes a step back significantly as well. Colorado, I think, is going to regress a lot without Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders. And then West Virginia isn't projected very high, but I just think they're going to be at the very bottom of the Big 12 this season. If you enjoyed the podcast, make sure you like and share it with your friends. Follow me on Twitter at DailyCFBCBB, and enjoy the rest of your day.